Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next round of lightning talks. First up, we have Zijun.
Okay. Hello everyone. I'm Zijun Wang, currently an undergraduate student, majors in engineering physics and applied mathematics from University of Illinois and Urbana-Champaign. Today, I'm going to give a brief introduction of my project, FAIR Principles Guided End-to-End Cyber Infrastructure for Preservation of UFO Models. My mentors are Professor Mark Newbold, Dr. Arvik Roy, and Dr. Martin Fikert. Uh, First, let me introduce some background information of UFO models and FAIR principles. UFO model is an abbreviation of Universal Fan Rule Output Model. Such model is used to store detailed information of beyond standard model theory, such as information of particles, parameters, and vertices associated with Feynman diagram and Feynman rules. And then such model can be used by Monte Carlo event generators, such as MATGraph, to simulate collider physics in the context of the beyond standard model theories. Unlike other models which store beyond standard model physics information in a collection of text files, require further parsing and interpretation before they can be used by every different event generator. UFO models store different information of the particle model in a generator-independent way into different Python files. Such a storage method allows event generators working directly with UFO models without any modification or further interfacing. Thus, UFO models allow a convenient way to access physics model information on different platforms. However, like any other digital content, UFO models have software and platform dependencies, require version controlling, and can benefit from a unified way of preserving and distributing those resources. So we hope to introduce FAIR principles, which stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable principles for UFO model preservation. FAIR principles provide guidelines to search, obtain, and use digital objects or data from Internet database. The guidelines focus on improving the ability of machines to automatically search and use data and aim to help users better access and reuse those existing data. So in this project, we hope to develop FAIR criteria for preservation of UFO models. We aim to create a set of tools guided by the FAIR principles as a bridge among the developers and users of UFO models. For developers, a central public repository will be published to handle registration and verification of the UFO models. Equipped with continuous integration tools available via GitHub, the repository will allow UFO developers to submit and register their model via the GitHub command line interface. The continuous integration tool will perform automated checks on the files being committed and will provide feedback to the developers when necessary. Each model will be identified with a set of keywords, including the archive identifier and or the digital object identifier for the associated publication. As a result, the work done by the theorists and phenomenologists will receive better visibility within the community, and they will be able to document and revise their modes better. For users, a Python application programming interface will be built for them to search for UFO models with keywords. The interface will search the Git repository and offer the users with a choice of potential matches that the user can choose from and eventually use the interface to download and use them. In this way, users can find existing models more conveniently and quickly to meet the needs of research. Since I have started my project, until now, I have done some background info reading about UFO models and FAIR principles to understand details of UFO model files and standard of FAIR principles. I also started learning about continuous integration on GitHub and have designed a first set of tests. And here is the references list, and that's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Zijun. Any questions?
Okay, no questions?
Thank you.
I could ask one.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Do you
ahead.
need to still share my screen?
I think it's fine. I mean, unless there's something that's specific. Go ahead with the question.
Okay, yeah, just asking, I mean, this sounds like a really useful thing. How much upstream sort of, do you think, have you been working with some of the generator authors, specifically MagGraph you mentioned? Do you think there's a hope that they will use this useful thing?
I'm not work with them users like the UFO models is I think the UFO models is designed for the matrix event generators, or like they can be directly used by the event generators like MagGraph.
So you're saying it's already an adopted standard?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is, and we've contacted a number of theorists that we're working with. So this isn't being done in, I think that was the spirit of what we've reached out to a number of theorists in this area. Yeah, and this is in the UFOs are standard ways to do this, but the FAIR is not so good. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Maya, are you ready to go, or you want me to move to the next person?
We're ready. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay. I'm Maya. I'm going to be a junior at Michigan State, and I'm going to be working with the Alpha group at Davidson College, in collaboration with FRIB and IRIS-HEP. The active target time projection chamber is a particle detector at FRIB. It works by aiming a beam of isotopes into a gas, which acts as the detecting medium and the target. We hope to make an unsupervised pre-training model that can be used for all ATTPC experiments. We do this because labeling training sets is very tedious and takes a long time with large data sets we're working with. And retraining models for every experiment is time consuming, since experimental parameters change every 2 weeks. So we'll be using PointNet, which is an architecture that uses exclusively point clouds and makes point-wise predictions. But PointNet is a supervised architecture and trying to accomplish an unsupervised task. So first we'll voxelize our data, and each voxel will be indexed. Then the voxels will get shuffled into different areas of the cloud. And then the PointNet model will attempt to put the voxels at the correct index. You can think of this process like shuffling around an already solved Rubik's Cube and then resolving it. So the input, the PointNet model is the scrambled data, and output is the unscrambled. So we already have preliminary results for simulated data for a magnesium-22 beam with helium gas. So the picture on the far left here is the original event. I don't know how easy it is for you guys to see, but part of it's brown and the other part of it's pink. That's because the brown and pink part are each in there for the voxels. So in the middle picture, it's after it's been shuffled. And then the last picture is the model's guess at where the voxels were originally. So you'll notice that it's colored blue now. That's because the model actually predicted where it was supposed to be perfectly. If the voxel was in the wrong place, then it'd be colored red. So we plan on training large amounts of unlabeled experimental data from various other experiments. Right now we're working on the data for an oxygen-16 beam with helium gas data, but at the end of the day, we're not really interested in solving Rubik's Cubes, right? We hope to do event and track classification using output found in the global point features seen here in the architecture for our model. We expect this to work because in the past, similar methods have been used to classify things like shared planes. Yeah, thank you. And now happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Well, thank you, Maya. Any questions for Maya? Okay. Thank you again, Maya. Next up is Ziyang.
Hello. All right, I will share my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yep, you're ready to go.
Okay. Hello, my name is Ziyang. I'm from University of Wisconsin-Madison, majoring in computer science. Today I'll be presenting my project, adding network meshing to data federation caches. And Brian Lin is my mentor, who is also from UW-Madison. He's OSG software team manager. And unfortunately, he cannot be here today. Okay, first, motivation. So high luminosity LHC experiments will bring a huge increase in data volume. And the experiments store data on distributed data federations, consisting of cache and origin servers to efficiently transfer and reuse data. So it is critical to ensure that the data management and access work well. Therefore, the project goal is to deploy network meshing tooling for data federations. The data federation mentioned is provided by OSG. Experimental data is streamed from data origins to distributed data caches all over the world. Users can achieve low latency and high data transfer throughput by accessing data caches near their locations or build their own data caches rather than accessing data origins directly. And PerfSonar will be used to do the network measuring job. PerfSonar is a network measuring toolkit for testing end-to-end network performance. It can test and monitor all the nodes on the network path and look for areas of low performance. So the first phase of this project is to deploy data cache and PerfSonar containers using Docker. Docker is an open source application container engine that allows developers to package their own applications in a unified form, which provides an easy approach for users to create their own data caches. Then the second phase is to orchestrate those cache and PerfSonar containers using Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a management system that provides flexible control of those Docker containers. So it helps PerfSonar containers to perform certain network measuring tasks on those data caches. So yeah, according to plan, by the end of the project, a network measuring toolkit will be delivered. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions for Ziyang? No? Okay. Thank you for your talk. Next up is Zoe. Zoe, you want to share your slides?
Hi, I'm Zoe Bilodeau. I'm talking about my project. I'm optimizing and calculating correlations for Zima. I'm a senior at Skidmore College. I'm a computer science major and an art minor. My previous research experiment is investigating factors affect trust in COVID technologies. And this summer I'm working on the Xenon Dark Matter project. My mentors, Tina Peters and Chris Tunnell. So background on the Xenon project, they're on their 4th version, Xenon NT. And the goal of this project is to detect dark matter using dual phase time projection chamber. So dark matter particles will float into this tank and into the smaller tank that's filled with liquid and gaseous xenon and interact in a way that emits light. And there are sensors in the tank that will detect this light, and it should have unique signals such that it'll be recognizable as dark matter. This project is located in Gran Sasso, deep in the mountain, to filter out particles that could interfere. And my project and goals with this project relate to positional reconstruction. So currently they're using a Bayesian network, a type of probabilistic graphical model, and using the geometric pattern of the sensors to determine where in the tank the interaction is occurring, which is important to determine that the interaction is actually between dark matter and the xenon and not dark matter and particles coming from the metal on the sides of the tank. But right now, the Bayesian network is pretty simple and has some missing relationships between sensors. So currently it implies that there's no relationship between the number of photons each sensor is detecting, which we know is not true, as if one sensor is detecting a lot of photons, the sensor next to it should also be detecting a similar amount of photons. And filling in these relationships would allow us to have a more accurate positional reconstruction. But doing this, calculating these correlations is very costly, as these sensors require Poisson distributions because they're counting photons, and it requires integrating over multi-dimensional Poisson distributions, which integrating over 3 would require like 30,000 calculations to do like a not great job. And here we want to calculate over 7-dimensional Poisson distributions. So it's really slow right now. So I'm working on optimizing both the Poisson BMF generation and optimizing the integration calculation over multi-dimensional distributions. And one other use that I'll work on with these correlations is being able to use them to fill in gaps of information left by broken sensors. Because these sensors are very complicated and need a lot of fine tuning. And if they break at all, they're very hard to fix. And their data can't be trusted. So we want to be able to integrate over all possible values the sensor could have detected, and that would use the other Poisson distributions from the other sensors, and then we'd be able to make a good guess as to how many photons that sensor would have likely detected. That's all. Thank you for listening. Anyone have any questions?
Thank you, Zoe. Anyone with any questions for Zoe?
Oh, I have a question.
Sure.
What are the benefits in this case of using a Bayesian approach?
I'll be honest, I haven't studied the network that much.
Okay, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
sure. No, I'm sorry. That's a good question. I'll ask my mentors.
That's okay. I mean, some of the students have just started, so I guess it's still a learning process. So, but that's part of the program. So, so anyway, thank you, Zoe, again. Next up is Jake.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Can you see everything?
Yep.
Okay, hello, my name is Jake Lee. I am a rising junior at the University of Illinois, where I am majoring in computer engineering. The project I am working on is ServiceX dashboard for Jupyter Hub, and my mentors are Dr. Oksana Shadura, Professor Gordon Watts, Dr. Benjamin Galuski, Dr. Alexander Held, and Mason Profit. Now I will go over some background on my project. So ServiceX is a data extraction and delivery service. For how it works, users will input data sets with specific instructions, and ServiceX will read the files in that data set, and with the given framework that's inputted in, it will extract the data and store it in an easily analyzable format. And for its uses, ServiceX can be co-located with data sets to provide fast and efficient data reduction strategies. It can provide data as awkward arrays, and it can work as a data backend to COFIA and TreyX fitter analysis tools. Here's an example of running a ServiceX notebook in the Coffee Castle analysis facility. This particular screenshot is of a Jupyter Hub interface from the University of Chicago's analysis facility. And you can see here the Dask Jupyter Hub plugin. And here is what the ServiceX Jupyter Hub plugin would look like, which I will get into on the next slide. So for the project goals, the primary goal of my project is to create a Jupyter Hub plugin that will give users access to a ServiceX dashboard. This plugin will be able to provide the ability to monitor all user transforms and give dashboard-like functionality that exists on the main ServiceX website. And the secondary goal of the project is to add more existing features to the dashboard. An example of this would be log forms for when data delivery goes wrong. And this is a screenshot of an existing ServiceX dashboard hosted on a separate address, which is not integrated in the analysis facility and requires Globus authentication. And this will be what the ServiceX Jupyter Hub plugin will be emulating. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you for listening. And now I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Jake. Any questions for Jake before we move to the next student? Okay. Next up is Elliott. Elliott, you want to share your slides?
Yep, just give me one moment. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, great. So my name is Elliott Kauffman. I am, my project is adapting PV Finder to the CMS and Atlas experiments. I am a recent grad of Duke University with a physics major and a math minor. My mentors are Henry Jardiner, Mike Sokoloff, and Rocky Beauregard. All right, so as a bit of an introduction to what PV Finder is, its goal is to use machine learning to determine the location of the primary vertices of particle interactions using reconstructed tracks. So when we record data from these detectors, we generally only have the hits that the particles make in the various detectors. These are then reconstructed into tracks, but then we also would like to know basically the origin of the particle interactions, and these are known as primary vertices. So this project is basically using machine learning techniques to use what we do have, which is tracks, to basically predict the location of primary vertices in various detectors. So it was developed for LHCb, and it has had pretty good success in LHCb so far, which motivates the extension to other experiments, namely CMS and ATLAS. So I'll briefly go over the steps used to in this project. So we start from the point of having reconstructed tracks from hits. Each track has an associated uncertainty, meaning we can sum up all their probability density functions and then collapse it onto the z-axis, which is the direction of the beamline, in order to produce this sort of histogram that represents the track density along the direction of the beamline. This can be seen in green. An example of this is seen in green on the left here. So then we, that green distribution is the input into the machine learning network. And then in order for validation, we use truth information from Monte Carlo data. So an example of this is also shown on the left. We take truth primary vertices and use the number of associated tracks to come up with a distribution that represents that truth primary vertex's location. And that is in blue again on the left. And then the network is trying to predict the blue distribution. The result here is shown in red. So if the red distribution is within a certain distance or number of bins from the blue distribution, it's counted as a success. So as I mentioned, LHCb has come a long way in this task. I think they've achieved around a 98% efficiency with a relatively low false positive rate. So that motivates my project, which is extending it to ATLAS and CMS. So why is it necessary to have a whole project focused on adapting this to ATLAS and CMS? So the detectors have ATLAS and CMS have pretty similar data, but they are both very different from LHCb. So these geometry differences lead to a little differences in these kernel density estimators. So I have just this diagram talking about the differences. So in LHCb, we have less tracks, which mean we have fewer primary vertices per event. So our KDE is going to have fewer peaks. And we also have lower resolution in the Z direction. I think their bin width is 100 microns. So the peaks in the KDE are going to be less precise. So, but in CMS and ATLAS, we have more tracks, more PVs per event. So we have a lot of peaks in a KDE, a lot more than LHCb, around probably 5 to 10 times as many. But we also have better resolution in Z. So we have smaller bins. I think we're currently using a bin size of 40 microns for both ATLAS and CMS. So this should mean that the peaks in the KDE, although there are more of them, they are more precise. So the idea is that hopefully the better resolution will help account for the increase in the number of peaks. So I've shown two examples of KDEs compared to truth PV locations on the right to demonstrate the difference between LHCb and CMS in particular. I should also mention, I did spend last summer working on these KDEs a lot in the CMS detector. So a lot of this is kind of the accumulation of a lot of work so far. But you can see here in the LHCb example, there are only 4 PVs, and they roughly correspond to peaks in the green distribution, which is the KDE. And on the bottom here, we have a lot more, and they still correspond to peaks in the green distribution. However, there are just a lot more of them. And you can see that sometimes there are peaks, tiny peaks that have no associated red line. So they are peaks without small peaks without a corresponding truth PV. And we are also saving using the maximum track density position in X and Y, or the transverse plane, as well as an additional feature, which basically, if we have a secondary vertex, it's more likely to be more displaced from the origin. So hopefully that feature can help supplement this KDE. And my starting point as far as the CNN goes is the UNet architecture. So this was originally developed for medical images, I believe, and it was adapted for use in PV Finder and LHCb by a couple of other students working in PV Finder, Michael and Will. And basically it has symmetrical compression and expansion paths with skip connections at every between every analogous step. And then, so this is the basic architecture, and the skip connections are performed through concatenating feature maps that are over here. And this is my starting point. It has done pretty well in LHCb so far, and it has trained faster than the original CNN that they were using. So I'm using it as my starting point, and that's sort of where I am now. I am working on training with UNet and seeing where that takes me. So any questions?
Thank you, Elliott. Gordon?
Yeah, one really simple question. I can't remember which slide number it was, but it was very early when you had this really nice cartoon of that one right there, the PV Finder that's showing right now. So I understood the blue and the red, but what's the orange, of which there seems to be a second bump around -65?
So that is actually also red. It's the same color. I think it's a little bit, it's a little bit transparent, so it appears to be a different color when overlapped.
Because it mixes with the blue.
Yeah, so it would be predicting something there when there's not actually a blue peak. Yeah.
Okay, and then I had a super quick question about the network architecture, which is it's like the second to last slide or something that you showed, the skip connections. Yeah, the downward arrows that you have between each level, I guess, and the upward arrows. What are those? You know, it doesn't look like they're the same size. It's like you're coming from a, what is it, 568 by 568 to a 284 squared. How do those connections work? I don't know if you're familiar enough yet because you're at the start of this, but
there's like a kind of that's the convolution. It's like a sliding filter.
Okay, so these are convolution. Actually, there it is. Let's see, convolution 3 by 3. Okay. Yeah. Max pool. Okay, perfect. Upconvert. All right. Thanks. I guess I just did not read the legend well enough.
All right.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Next up is Haoran.
Yes. Give me a second and let me share the screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screens?
Yep. You're ready to go.
Great. Yeah, okay, so I guess I will just get started. So hello everyone, my name is Haoran, and
my project will be about enabling support for MiniAOD transformer for ServiceX. So something about me, I'm a rising senior in University of Washington, and right now I'm double majoring in physics and applied computational mathematics science. The mentors for this project will be Professor Gordon Watts, Dr. Benjamin Koski, Dr. Alexander Shadra, Dr. Alexander Held, and Mason Profits. So for getting started, I need to talk about ServiceX, which Jake has already introduced. But again, it is a distributed cloud-native application that extracts columnar data from the high-energy physics event data and delivers it to an analyst. And this diagram here below shows it's a brief workflow of the ServiceX transformation run. In short, it is a high-energy physics event data location, extraction, filtering, and transformation system. And the funcadl is a data query language in production for ServiceX. It's a functional ADL query language is used to tell ServiceX how to extract the data, like which column to choose or which specific filter to use. And one of the backends of the functional ADL data query language is based on C++ for the Atlas data and the CMS data. However, there is a limitation that the C++ backend currently runs only on the Atlas binary format, which is short for XAOD, and the CMS format, binary format, short for AOD. And next, we have to introduce the MiniAOD file, which is a compressed data format. This compressed data format has been developed because of the huge increase in the amount of data for the runs of HEP experiment, but along with a limited increase in the data storage resources. And MiniAOD file is only 10% of the size of the AOD file used in CMS experiment. And currently, MiniAOD format has been commonly used for physics analysis with the CMS experiment. So this project aims to create an interface similar to the existing functional ADL XAOD repository. In the existing repository right now, both its CMS AOD file and Atlas XAOD backends are available. So we aim to create a similar interface so that the user can also send the hierarchical SQL like queries to a MiniAOD backend. Also, this project aims to make the required modifications for the C++ ServiceX backend to allow processing the publicly available CMS MiniAOD binary files. And at the very end, a similar modification for NanoAOD files, which will be similar to a MiniAOD file, but comes with a more compressed size. Maybe it could be achieved if the necessary tools are published by the time of this fellowship. And that's the end of my quick presentation, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Haoran. Any questions for Haoran? Okay. Next up is Peter.
Right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Peter Ridolfi. My project is designing a script for a pyhf to CMS combined converter. I'm going to be mentored by Dr. Alexander Held, Dr. Matthew Feichart, and Professor Kyle Kramer. So let's just get into it. So about myself, I'm a current undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, and I work on research for the Atlas group there. I'm majoring in applied mathematics, but I also have working on a minor in computer science as well. So my project, kind of the background, the description. So there's statistical model specifications for the ATLAS experiments and the CMS experiments. And as Elliott Kauffman mentioned earlier, the data that's collected by both of those experiments is very similar in structure, but there's kind of differences in the way that they handle it with the models. So ATLAS uses something called HIS factory, which is a kind of lightweight way of handling the data where you just, it's straightforward binning of the data. And Combine also allows for that kind of structure, but it's more open world, like you can kind of modify it, and there's a lot more options as opposed to pyhf. It's kind of more constrained with what you can do. But both models have similar kind of goals and statistical tests. So trying to find likelihood estimates and hypothesis tests and things like that. But there's kind of different implementations for how they do that. So there's slightly nuanced, they're called modifiers that you can kind of include different uncertainties in the model, and the implementation is different. So my project is going to be kind of how to convert the model to kind of convert the HIS factory model to the Combine model, or vice versa, and to kind of take advantages of these nuances. So if you're using Combine, if you want to have something that's kind of more lightweight and easy to use, or on the pyhf side, if you're using pyhf and you want to kind of be able to use more options and have more kind of freedom, then you could translate over to Combine. And also another part of this project is I want to kind of explore the differences and kind of inaccuracies that are inherent in the converter, because some of the things that I'm trying to convert either don't directly translate, or they do translate, but the way that the calculations work, it doesn't exactly, the results don't perfectly match. So kind of exploring why those differences occur and kind of how to make them as close as possible is a main part of this project. And then at the end, just being able to get them as close as possible, and then putting the script on GitHub for use in both the Combine or the CMS experiments and the ATLAS experiments. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions for Peter? Okay. Next up is Saransh.
Yes, I'll share my screen.
Great.
Are the slides visible?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Saransh, second year undergraduate at the University of Delhi, India, pursuing a major in information technology and mathematics with a minor in computational biology. This summer, I will be preparing Vector for its first major release under the mentorship of Dr. Henry Schreiner and Dr. Jim Piversky. I would like to start with a brief introduction about Vector. Vector is a Python package that allows working with 2D, 3D, and Lorentz vectors to solve common physics problems in a NumPy-like way. Vector uses named and conventions set by roots T Lorentz vector and the Lorentz vector under the math namespace, and HEP vector repository under my mentor's account, which was in the beginning redesigned as Vector, and coffee.nanoevents.methods.vector. Users can create vector in a variety of coordinate systems, including Cartesian, cylindrical, spherical, and any combination of these with time or proper time called Lorentz vectors. Vector comes loaded with 3+2 backends. The 2 stands for number-based backends, and the other 3 are the plain backends. Starting with the first 3, pure Python object backend, NumPy backend, an awkward array backend. And for the number part, an object number backend and an awkward number backend, which are meant to leverage the JIT, the just-in-time compiled calculations on vectors. Additionally, all the packages of scikit-hep kind of blend in together, which is shown in this amazing tutorial by Mason Prophet, who is coincidentally also present in this meet today. This tutorial basically shows how uproot, awkward, and vector work together and how one can perform data analysis using all these 3 libraries together. This is how the vectors API looks like for a single backend, which is the object backend. You can replace all the occurrences of object here with another backend, say awkward, to visualize how the API looks like for the awkward backend. Additionally, the awkward backend also has a bunch of other classes which inherits awkward arrays, the vector and array and the momentum array classes. Interestingly, these classes don't define the actual methods or the functions of a constructed vector. Rather, the functions are defined in a separate sub package which is named _compute, which is also available under the vector package. And these functions are then called using a dispatch function when a particular class's method is invoked. This makes the vectors code base very scalable, and it has plenty of room for more backends in the future, such as TensorFlow or JAX. So areas of improvement, which would then define the goals of this project. First one is the constructors, or the init methods in the language of Python. The user-facing API of vector does not expose its true API right now, which are the Python classes. Rather, vector provides wrapper functions named as obj, arr, and awk, or array with a small a for NumPy backend and array with a capital A for the awkward backend to the users. And these functions are also displayed in the dunder wrapper method of the classes, making them even more ambiguous to the users who are actually using the library. The second improvement would be documentation. Vector lacks proper user as well as API documentation and tutorials. Currently, there are no detailed explanations in the existing tutorials, and most of the functions and classes do not contain docstrings. And the third addition or the improvement would be benchmarks. I'm not sure if all the scikit-hep packages don't have benchmarks, but most of them don't have benchmarks. And the benchmarking would be a valuable addition to the vector project, which could then be propagated to all the scikit-hep packages in the future. Also, benchmarking against root would be something interesting. Brief goals for my project: constructors, which was the first area of improvement. This would include exposing all classes and their init methods or constructors to the user API, adding keyword arguments to all the init methods, and making sure all the backends work properly with the proposed changes. Documentation, this would include adding API documentation for already existing API, API documentation for functionalities added, and tutorials for the users. The third goal would be benchmarks, developing a benchmark suite for vector, which will then be propagated to other scikit-hep packages. This would use airspeed velocity, ASV, GitHub Actions, and would ideally create a website, easy to access website using GitHub pages, which can be accessed by anyone or developer or a user. And then some miscellaneous goals such as bug fixes, core jobs, minor features, cleanups, etc. So summarizing the presentation, my goal would be to prepare vector for its first ever major release. Thank you. I would be happy to take up questions if there are any.
Thank you, Saransh. Any questions? Lots of applause, a few applause. So next up is Benjamin.
Yep, there's my screen. All right, let me know if that's visible.
Yep, you're ready to go.
Right, thank you. So I'm Ben. I go to UMass Amherst, and my project is on electron identification in a Muon Collider with beam-induced background. So I have some great mentors. I have Sergio Dindariani at Fermilab. I have Simone Pagan-Griso and Kiro Kritza, who have been working with most closely at Berkeley Lab. For my project background, essentially the LHC will go through its entire life cycle. It has had a long lifespan and has had a lot planned, but eventually get to the end. And so in terms of like future colliders, there have been a bunch proposed, such as the FCC. But another one that has been proposed is a Muon Collider, which collides muons instead of electrons or protons, which are two of the most commonly collided particles. Unfortunately, Muon Colliders are significantly harder to make due to some challenges with muons. Due to how muons are formed, it's a lot hard to form them into a tightly packed beam. That's not one of the things that I'm trying to solve right now, but it's so important. What I am working on is the muon decay in the accelerator tube, causing a lot of particles that are not from collisions to appear in the detector. So you've seen this picture down here. You can see how in the particle accelerator tube, there are a bunch of muon decays causing a spray of neutrons, photons, and electrons. Generally, out of those particles, neutrons and photons are able to be tracked a bit better, but unfortunately, electrons are a bit harder. So for my project, I'm utilizing the supercomputing powers over at NERSC. Specifically, I'm using the Cori supercomputer. And what I'm doing is trying to manage some certain aspects of electrons. So there's two things that electrons can undergo, which will make them harder to track, which are multiple scattering and Bremsstrahlung. For example, Bremsstrahlung, you can see a diagram right here of where an electron in the presence of a magnetic field will emit a photon and cause its directions to change. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, but since we're doing so much detecting, since a lot of the detecting is done with magnetic or electric fields, those electrons can curve in ways that make them appear as other particles. So my job is to try to eliminate that via cuts on the particles by looking at what our current tracking software show as the initial azimuth to the beam and the transverse momentum to the beam. Additionally, I'll be adding other code to repositories as is needed to account for these two effects. As you can see down here, generally for higher transverse momentums, the tracking is pretty good. But for lower transverse momentums, it dips a bit. But the more significant thing is for the polar angle to the beam. Without background radiation, the tracking is decently good. You can see it in blue, but in orange, you can see that the tracking does degrade quite quickly as we get to lower polar angles. And that is it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Benjamin. Any questions for Benjamin? Okay. Next up is Annie.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Anni, and my project name is Conditional Generation of High Energy Particle Collisions with Graph Networks. And my mentors are Professor Javier Duarte and Raghav Kansal. And I'm in the University of California, San Diego, in Department of Physics. So yeah, that's the introduction of myself. I'm a third-year undergraduate student at UC San Diego. I'm a physics major, and my mentors are UCSD staff. And so there's some background information. First off, the generative adversarial networks. So this is a popular generative model in machine learning, include a generator and the discriminator. And a generator produces the simulations, and the discriminator tries to distinguish between real and generated simulations. And the generator and discriminator are trained together adversarially. So by improving the discriminator's ability to distinguish, we can also simultaneously improve the generator's ability to produce models closer to real jets. And about the auxiliary classifier GAN. So that is an advanced training method for GANs that is developed recent years. The discriminator outputs both the probability of the jet to the real and predictions of the jet's features. So it allows us to generate jets of specific types and momenta. So that would be required in practical applications at LHC. And about GNNs, so the graph neural networks is a class of neural network for processing data best represented by graph data structures. And that can be directly applied to graphs and provide an easy way to node level, edge level, and graph level prediction tasks. And in our project, GNN is used to be graphical representation, describes jets as nodes and edges and combine them as a network. And in comparison to the traditional graph, like picture representation, this is less computational complexity, high efficiency with more information. And so my project is the proposed results should be a strong AC-GAN, MP-GAN algorithm using GNN to generate conditional models of jets with high fidelity. And this model can generate jets in a more efficient way with controllable features of the jets, which can serve as a strong tool for future applications. And there are some benefits of this method. First, in comparison with traditional GANs, it will be able to model jets conditionally, like their types and momenta. And secondly, it's more efficient and performant for jet simulations due to the use of graph neural networks instead of image-based models. And overall, the development of such a method of condition generation could have a large impact on computation as learned and provide more useful data for further high energy particle physics research. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Any questions? Okay, and next up is Scott.
All right, can everyone see my slides?
Yes.
All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Scott Demarest, and I'm pursuing a physics bachelor's at the Florida Institute of Technology. My mentors are Nick Smith and Jim Pavarsky, and this project proposes to enable Dask to read root files and access xrootd storage systems. So some background first. Dask is a popular data analysis Python library that mainly does two things. It parallelizes computations across multiple machines, like in a cluster, but can also scale to run on just your laptop. It also scales up other popular tools like NumPy, for example, to work with data, to work with very big data sets that don't normally fit in memory. xrootd is a data storage framework commonly used in high energy physics. It's used by the four main detectors at the LHC and as well as others. And it lets you read and write files remotely over the internet. And it's kind of like other cloud storage services like Amazon S3. And root files are a file format used for storing complex data structures more than just plain tables or text files. Root files are not related to xrootd, despite the similar names. xrootd can store many file types as well as root files. So that's the background. All right, so the problem is that Dask doesn't currently work with xrootd, and it can't read root files. So if you're a Dask user that wants to do these things, you need to use another Python library like pyxrootd or uproot. And the workflow looks something like the diagram in the top right, where Dask uses one of these libraries, which uses xrootd, and both the library and Dask exist at the user level, which means that the user must know the ins and outs of these libraries, which takes time away from doing physics. Ideally, a Dask user should only have to use Dask, and everything else should be handled in the background. This is how Dask works for most other files and file systems, since it uses a standard API called fspec. So if you want to use Dask to read a CSV file from Amazon S3, for example, all the user has to do is give Dask a URL, and it would be nice if it could be that way for xrootd. And it can be that way with the right interfaces. The ideal workflow is shown in the bottom right, where a Dask user only uses Dask and everything else is handled on the lower layers. What's nice is that these layers can use the same proven tools that we've been using. It's just the interfaces between them that need to be made. Here we go. So the solution to our problem is to make these interfaces, and there are 4 of them labeled on the right. Interface A already exists since Dask already uses fspec, and interface C already exists as a proof of concept by Doug Davis. B and D do not exist yet, and creating those is the aim of this project. Interface B is what's called an fspec implementation, and fspec already has implementations for other file systems, and one can be made for xrootd systems. Interface D is an uproot source, and uproot has many sources for other file systems, and one can be made for fspec. So in the end, with these interfaces, Dask will be able to use xrootd and root files in a more user-friendly and time-saving way, and it'll be done using libraries that are already established parts of the scientific Python ecosystem. There might also be some performance improvements since fspec allows for some more advanced features, but that's more of a side goal. The main goal is to let Dask users do more science and less file management. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott? All right, everybody. That was our last talk for today. Thank you to all the fellows for your presentations, and we look forward to hearing more from you as your work progresses this summer. And good luck.
Thanks, everyone. Nice talks. And as Rob said, we're looking forward to exciting things over the summer.